Hello, this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video we're going to walk through the second lesson in Latin Grammar 1 in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. In Lesson 1 we looked at the Latin alphabet. We talked about the names and the sounds of the Latin letters. We learned about diphthongs, syllables, and finally about words and sentences. We said that a dictio, or word, is made of syllables, and we learned that oratio, or speech, which I said really means a sentence, oratio is made out of words, ex dictionibus. In this second lesson, we're going to continue, and we're going to pick up where we left off. We learned that speech is made of words, ex dictionibus. Speech is made of words, and since speech is made up of words, speech is a whole, and words are the parts. Words are the parts of speech. And so in grammar, we talk about the parts of speech. And what we're talking about are the different words that are used to construct sentences and express ideas. Words are the parts of speech. Our goal in the study of grammar is to learn how to speak and write rightly in a particular language. We want to speak and write rightly. The art of grammar allows us to do two things. First of all, it allows us to express and communicate our ideas accurately and fully and clearly. If there's something that I'd like to express, my mastery of the art of grammar allows me to express that as clearly as possible. The more skilled I am in grammar, the more clearly I can communicate or express my ideas. That's the first benefit we seek in the study of the art of grammar. The second is that we may enjoy a shared language and we may share ideas, not so that just my ideas can be shared clearly, but that an entire society can share complex ideas clearly. The more a society masters the art of grammar, the more clearly they can communicate and discuss complex ideas and issues. So there are two benefits that we seek through the study of grammar. First, to express our own ideas clearly, and second, to be able to share and discuss complex ideas with as many people as possible by establishing a rule for our language that allows us to all communicate. So long as we abide by those same rules, we can all learn to communicate more and more clearly, even though our ideas may be complex and require careful communication. So those are the goals of the study of grammar. But when we think about the fact that language or speech is made up of words, how can we actually master a language? If the language and the speech of a language is made up of words, then it must be necessary for us to study and master all of the words of a language in order to become skilled in that language, to be able to speak and write rightly using that language. The study of grammar would require us to study all of the words of a language. And if we look at an English dictionary, we'll find that there are tens of thousands of words. Tens of thousands of words. And how could we possibly establish a rule for our language if everyone is required to study and learn tens of thousands of words, or else they won't be able to communicate? Well, we can't do that. So wise men in the past studied language and saw that even though there are tens of thousands of words in a language, all of the different words can be categorized into 8 different classes, 8 different categories of words. And if we learn the characteristics of each class of words, we'll know a good deal about all of the words in each of those classes. So if there are 8 different classes of words, and we learn the characteristics of each of those 8 classes of words, we can know a lot about all words by simply studying the 8 classes of words. Now, in grammar, these 8 classes of words are referred to as the 8 parts of speech. The 8 parts of speech, or the 8 classes of words out of which speech is made in a language. And so, in our first lesson in Latin grammar, we studied what's called orthography, the study of letters and their sounds. That was studied in lesson 1. In lesson 2, we begin the second part of grammar, which is the study of etymology. Etymology. Let me write it on the board for you. E-T-Y-M-O-L-O-G-Y. Etymology. Etymology is the study of the 8 parts of speech. Orthography is the study of letters and sounds. Etymology is the study of words, of the 8 parts of speech. We're going to study each of the 8 classes of words. We're going to learn their characteristics. We're going to learn the forms that they use. And out of those parts of speech, in the next part of grammar, the first part, as I said, is orthography, letters and sounds. The second part of grammar is etymology. The third part of grammar is called syntax. And syntax simply means construction. And the fourth part of grammar, which we'll study in Latin Grammar 3, is prosody. Prosody has to do with pronunciation, figures of speech, poetry, and things like that. Sort of advanced figurative and poetic language. Lesson 1, we studied Latin orthography, beginning in Lesson 2 and continuing through all of Latin Grammar 1, we're going to study etymology. In Latin Grammar 2, we're going to study syntax, and in Latin Grammar 3, we study prosody. Those are the 4 parts, of grammar. So beginning in this lesson, we're going to study etymology, or the 8 parts of speech. Now, in Lesson 2, we just have 2 simple rules to learn. It's a very short, simple lesson, but it's a very important lesson. And sometimes when students see that a lesson is short and simple, they don't pay much attention to it because they think, oh, that's easy. And they just blow through it, skip past it, and run into trouble later on, because even though this lesson may be short and simple, it's very, very important. So let's make sure we study this carefully, because this is the foundation of the whole study of etymology. So let's walk through these 2 rules in our lesson, and I'll make a few comments just to help you appreciate the importance of these rules, and then we'll move on in the study of Latin etymology. The first rule in Latin, taken from Alvarez's Latin grammar, reads, partes orationis sunt octo. Partes orationis sunt octo. And that translates pretty easily as the parts of speech are 8. The parts of speech are 8. There are 8 parts of speech. Notice partes, the parts, orationis. Orationis is a form of the word oratio, which we studied in Lesson 1. Oratio, speech, is made of words. Here we start with the parts of speech are 8. There are 8 parts of speech out of which sentences are made. And we have a list of the Latin names of the 8 parts of speech. And these names are significant. So let's take a look at the names and see what these names tell us about the 8 parts of speech. Just to list them, we have the 8 parts of speech: nomen, pronomen, verbum, participium, prepositio, adverbium, interjectio, et conjunctio. These are the 8 parts of speech. If you're looking at the text in the lesson, which I hope you are, you should see that in that list of the 8 parts of speech, there are commas after the first 3 names listed: nomen, comma, pronomen, comma, verbum, comma, and then participium is not followed by a comma, but by a semicolon. And the reason why is because, as we'll see in the next rule, these 8 parts of speech divide into 2 different groups. And so that semicolon marks the end of the first group of the parts of speech. And then we have the last 4: prepositio, adverbium, interjectio, et conjunctio. The last 4 parts of speech. Now, as for the names of the 8 parts of speech, the first part of speech is called nomen. And nomen is simply the Latin word for name. If you're working in Latin reading, you'll know that we read in the second lesson, cui nomen erat Johannes, for whom the name was John. John's name is given in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, in Latin reading. And we saw the word nomen in our reading. And it simply meant name, for whom the name was John. That first part of speech is simply names. The first kind of word is simply names. Names of things, names of people and places and things, names. Notice, unlike a modern grammar book, if you look at a modern grammar book, you may see the definition of a noun, which is what nomen is translated as in English. It will say a noun is a person, place, or thing. But that's not true. That's a silly modern definition of a noun. A noun is not a person, place, or thing. A noun is a name for a person, place, thing, or idea. A noun is a name. Make sure you always keep it clear that we're talking about words. We're talking about spoken things. We're not talking about things in the world. We're not talking about objects that exist physically outside of our minds. We're talking about words in grammar. A noun is not a person, place, or thing. If you point across the field here and see a house and you say, there's a house, that is a noun. That's not true. The house is not a noun. The name house is a noun. Nouns are names. We're talking about words. We're talking about parts of speech. So don't get caught up with modern grammar books or modern grammar rules or modern definitions. Most of them are dumbed down for modern schools, and they simply aren't true. When we study classical grammar, we're going to learn the right and true definitions for terms. So make sure you don't bring knowledge from other schools or other programs or other books into our classical grammar courses. Learn lessons clearly and stick to the words in our lessons. The first part of speech is nomen, which simply means a name. In English, this is translated as a noun, but it's important to remember that a noun is simply the name of something. The name of some object is nomen, the first part of speech. The second part of speech is pronomen. Pronomen. And if you look at that word, let me make some room here. If you look at that word pronomen, we simply have a compound word made up of the preposition pro and the word nomen. The preposition pro means in place of. And so a pronomen is simply a word that is used in place of a name or noun. A pronoun is a word used in place of a noun. That's the second of the parts of speech. The third part of speech is verbum. Verbum. Maybe I should just make a list here while I'm going. We have nomen is the first part of speech, and pronomen, and now we see verbum. Again, in Latin reading, we saw the word verbum in the very first verse of the Gospel of St. John. In principio erat verbum, this same word. In our translation of the Gospel of John, we translated it not as verb, but as word. Verbum in Latin simply means word. So we have name in place of a name and word. That's what these names of the parts of speech actually mean. Why would this third part of speech be translated as word? The reason why is because in order to have a sentence, in order to make any kind of speech, there must be a verb. There must be a verb. And so the verb is the essential word in a sentence. So essential that we can simply refer to the verb as the word. It is the word. The essential word in a sentence is the verb. But in English, like I said, we translate this as a verb. So literally, we have name in place of a name and word as the first three of the parts of speech. In English, these are translated as noun, pronoun, and verb. But if you understand the meaning of these names in Latin, it helps you to understand what they're talking about, and it makes this study much simpler. So that's the first three, nomen, pronomen, and verbum. The fourth part of speech is participium. Participium. This word or name in English is translated as participle, but that's not very helpful. What this word has to do with, if you look at the word, you can see that the word participate is derived from this word, or I should say this word is derived from the Latin word that means participation. Participium. What a participle is a certain kind of word that participates in the characteristics and functions of two other parts of speech. We're going to learn that nouns divide into two different kinds. They divide into what are called substantives and adjectives. So we have two different kinds of nouns, substantives and adjectives. Adjectives are names of qualities, and substantives, as the name says, are the names of substances. We're going to learn about all of this later, so don't worry about these details. Just listen and learn a little bit as I explain the meanings of these names. We're going to learn that nouns divide into two different classes, substantives and adjectives. Substantives are names for substances, names for things that exist in and of themselves, like a person. People's names are substantive nouns. The names of anything that you see or sense or perceive All of those things are substances. Even the names of ideas are substances if they exist in themselves. Substantive nouns are names for substances. Adjective nouns are names for qualities. Okay, so if we take this second kind of noun, adjective nouns, and we also take the characteristics of verbs, and we combine these and bring their characteristics together, a word that participates in the characteristics of both an adjective noun and a verb. Let me repeat that. A word that participates in the characteristics of both an adjective noun and a verb is called a participle. And again, we're going to study each of these parts of speech in complete detail as we go through Latin Grammar 1. But in this lesson, I'd like to introduce the 8 parts of speech and just explain the meaning of their names. When we combine the characteristics of adjectives with verbs, we make a different kind of word called a participle. And you see these in English all the time. They're very common. For example, if I say, running water. Running water. Water is a substantive noun, and running describes the water. Running looks like an adjective, but it's more than an adjective, because running has an idea of present time. There's an idea of time in this word. And so this word running acts like an adjective, but it also has the characteristics of a verb, which expresses time. And so when we combine the time of a verb with the quality of an adjective, we make a special kind of adjective that's called a participle. This is an example of a present participle. A present participle. Here's another example. Whipped cream. Whipped cream. Cream is a substantive noun, and it's described by the quality whipped. What kind of cream? Whipped cream. Another example. Iced tea. What kind of tea? Iced tea. Iced is clearly a quality. It's like an adjective, but it has time expressed in it. It's past tense. Iced tea is tea that has been iced. Whipped cream is cream that has been whipped. It was whipped, it was iced in the past. So these are like adjectives, but they also have the idea of time, and therefore they're like verbs. They participate in the characteristics of both adjective nouns and verbs. They're participles. They participate in the qualities of both adjectives and verbs. That's what participium refers to. Okay? So of the first 4 parts of speech, we have nomen, which means a name, pronomen, which means a word that stands in place of a name, verb, which means the word or the essential part of a sentence, and then participium, which is a word that participates in the characteristics of both an adjective noun and a verb. All right, those are the first 4 parts of speech. Now we continue in our list here, moving to number 5. Let me just clean this up. Number 5, we have prepositio. Which in English we translate as preposition. And again, the translation of these names into English doesn't help us very much. To translate this from nomen into noun doesn't help us very much. To translate this from pronomen into pronoun doesn't help us very much. To translate verbum into verb doesn't help much. And to translate participium into participle doesn't help us very much. Likewise, to translate prepositio, to translate it into preposition doesn't help us very much. All right? But if we look at this word, we can see what this part of speech really is. This is another compound word. Just as we had pronomen was a compound word, and we looked at what this part means, the same thing is true with prepositio. You can recognize right here we have position. Position means place. So it has something to do with placement. And this prefix pre means before. Like if I talk about a preview, it means it allows you to view something before. Pre means before. Preposition it's better if we understand it as preposition. Preposition, a word that is placed before another word. Preposition. A preposition is a word that is placed before a noun. So in Latin reading, we started with verse 1 and we read in principio. Principio is a noun. Principio is a substantive noun. But there's a word that is placed before the noun. This word that is placed before the noun is a preposition. We learned that in means in principio, in the beginning. A preposition is a word that's placed before a noun that explains the relationship of that noun to the other words of the sentence. Okay, so a preposition is a word that shows the relationship between a noun and the other words of a sentence. It's called prepositio because it is placed before the noun, prepositio. That's the 5th part of speech. The 6th part of speech in our list is adverbium. And once again, the translation of the Latin name adverbium into English is adverb, and that doesn't help us very much. Adverbium is another compound word. We see here the preposition ad, which has a number of different meanings. It means to, toward, or next to. We'll take the meaning next to illustrate our point here. Adverbium, we then see verbium, which is derived from the Latin word verb or word. Adverbium. It's a word that's placed next to another word. A word placed next to another word. So if I say, John runs, I have a substantive noun and I have a verb. But if I want to add more detail, if I want to add a quality, I want to explain how John runs. John runs quickly. This word that's set next to the verb is called an adverb, a word set next to another word, an adverb, okay? Now, in some grammar books, this is why you have to be careful, you'll be told that an adverb is a word that is set next to a verb to modify an action, but that's not true. An adverb isn't necessarily set next to a verb. It can also be set next to another adverb or an adjective. Okay, so it's better to learn the true meaning of an adverb, which is just a part of speech that is set next to another word to add meaning, usually to explain how something is done or how a quality exists, and so on. Here's an example. Non erat ille lux. In Latin reading we learned, not was he the light. Non erat ille lux. Non, the word that means not in English, non is an adverb. So anytime you use the word not, like I am not happy, not is an adverb, okay? One of the signs of an adverb in English, as we saw, was the prefix ly. That's an easy giveaway that shows us a word is an adverb. Happily, quickly, sadly, and so on. That ly ending usually marks an adverb. But it's not true to say that an adverb is a word that modifies a verb, because it can modify other adverbs and it can modify adjectives as well. So learn the right meaning of adverb. It's a word that's set next to another word, usually to clarify or add detail to the manner or how something is as it is. All right, that's the sixth part of speech, the adverb. Next, number 7, we have interjectio. Interjectio. And again, in English, this is translated as interjection, and that's not helpful. If you learn that that word means interjection, you still have no idea what it means. If we look at the Latin, we can see what's actually being said here. We have another compound word. The Latin preposition inter means between. Between things. Like international relations means relations between nations. International. Okay? Inter means between. Iectio, the word iectio in Latin, means placed or set, or it can even mean thrown. So interjectio means a word that is placed between something. All right? Now, when we learn what an interjection is a word that expresses emotion. An interjection is a word that expresses emotion. So, for example, if I see something funny and I yell out, "Ha!" That expression, that word, "ha," is an expression of emotion. It's an interjection. If I see my friend walking across the street and I want to get his attention and I yell, "Hey," I'm simply expressing an emotion. Hey, whoa, yo. That's an emotion I'm expressing with a word. That's an interjection. All right? If I hear something sad and it makes me grieve and I say, "Ah," that's an interjection. It expresses an emotion. All of those expressions of emotion in words are interjections. The reason we have this word interjectio is because that expression of emotion is placed between or in the midst of the other words of the sentence. It's that expression of emotion in the midst of our speech, between our words. That's where the idea of interjection comes from. And then lastly, the eighth part of speech, conjunctio. Conjunctio. In English, we get the translation conjunction, which doesn't help us. But if we look at the Latin words, we see that we have another compound word. This preposition con comes from the Latin preposition cum, which means with or together. Okay, so cum means with or together. Junctio has the idea of joining things together. A junction is a place where things come together. If you're driving, let's say you're going on a family trip, you'll find that you come to places where different highways come together. And that place where they come together is called a junction, a coming together. So this idea of conjunction is a name for a word that joins different parts of speech together. It may join words together, it can join phrases together, it can join sentences together, it can join paragraphs together. It's simply a word that joins together other parts of speech. That's a conjunction. Okay? Joined together. Conjunctio. So there you have the names of the 8 parts of speech, and you can see by understanding the meaning of the Latin words that are used to name the 8 parts of speech, we can have a pretty quick and simple understanding of what the different classes of words are. These are the 8 parts of speech. Now, let's just take a minute and let's just look at some examples, because it's hard to identify the parts of speech unless you have examples to use to compare words to. We said a noun is simply a name. So Thomas is an example of nomen. Thomas, that's a proper substantive noun. Tree is an example of nomen, but also adjectives like happy. The name of a number like 7. All of these are nouns. They all are examples of a nomen or name. Okay? Remember, adjectives and substantives are nouns. In a modern English book, you might see nouns and adjectives talked about like 2 different parts of speech. But we don't need to do that. There are simply 2 different kinds of nouns, substantives and adjectives. Secondly, pronouns. Pronouns could be things like he, she, it, we, us, me, I, you, that, this. On and on we could go. Any word that's used in place of another name is a pronoun. Okay, there are many pronouns. Next, verbum. Verbum is the essential word of a sentence. So, of course, the most common, most essential word for a sentence is, am, are. But then there are also tenses like were, was, shall be. These are all one kind of verb. But then we also have runs, ran, shall run. Different tenses. All of these are examples of verbs. Participium, I already gave you a few examples. running water, whipped cream, and so on. Preposition, we have in English, we have in, on, at, with, of, about, and so on. Words that are placed before nouns that explain the relationship of the noun to the other parts of speech in a sentence. Adverbium, words that are placed next to words, usually to express how something is done. We saw words that end with ly, like happily. Happily. Also words like not. Words that clarify how something is done. To say something is not done is to say how it's done. How is that done? It's not done. That's an adverb, okay? Interjection. Whoa. Usually interjections are followed by exclamation marks because they're exclamations, they're emotional expressions, usually exclamations, okay? Whoa. Oh. Hey. Ha. These are all examples of interjections. And lastly, conjunctions, words that join different parts of speech together, words that join parts of speech together. Obviously, we have and, also, but we also have the opposite, like but, however, nevertheless, for, therefore, since. All of these are conjunctions, okay? And again, we're going to study all of these in detail through the rest of Latin Grammar 1. So pay attention to the lesson, learn the ideas so you're familiar with them. As we go on in the course, we're going to get into all of the details. We're going to learn all examples of all of these parts of speech, all of the different forms and meanings and uses. We're going to study this in detail. This is the whole study of Latin Grammar 1. It's the study of etymology, the study of all of the parts of speech. So in this lesson, what you need to take away is simply what the names of the 8 parts of speech are, a general idea of what each of these parts of speech is, and maybe helpfully some examples. If you can think of some examples, that would be helpful. Now, in Latin Reading 1, which you should be studying at the same time alongside Latin Grammar 1, in Latin Reading 1, where I give you the exposition and tell you the translation and meaning of every word in our Latin reading, I tell you what part of speech every Latin word is. Okay, so when you study Latin reading, pay attention also and look at the parts of speech, because I name which of the 8 parts of speech every word in the translation belongs to. So as you study Latin reading, pay attention to the parts of speech, and you'll learn hundreds and hundreds of examples of the parts of speech, okay? Now, in our lesson here, in lesson 2, there's one more rule to be learned. We read, harum quatuor nomen pronomen verbum participium declinantur. So what does that mean? Harum means of these 8 parts of speech. Quatuor, 4 of them. Nomen, pronomen, verbum, and participium, the 4 I listed here. Nomen, pronomen, verbum, and participium. Of the 8 parts of speech, 4 of them declinantur, are declined. What does that mean? These 4 parts of speech are declined. What does that mean? It means that these words have different forms. Different forms are used to express ideas with these 4 parts of speech. So for a noun, there will be a number of different forms of every noun. for a pronoun, there will be a number of different forms for every pronoun. The same is true for verbs. The same is true for participles. These 4 parts of speech are declined. That means they have different forms that express different ideas. Okay? That's what that rule means. Harum quatuor nomen pronomen verbum participium declinantur. These 4 parts of speech are declined. They have different forms. These 4 parts of speech, I don't know if you can see this if I write over here on the video, they are not declined. Okay? These 4 parts of speech are not declined. The rule says, prepositio, adverbium, interjectio, conjunctio, declinationis sunt expertes. Declinationis sunt expertes. And what that means is they are free of declension. They are not declined. They are free of declension. Declinationis sunt expertes. They are free of declension. So these 4 parts of speech, we're going to have to learn all kinds of different forms when we learn them. These 4 parts of speech do not have different forms. They are simply words that need to be studied like vocabulary. Okay, so these 4 parts of speech will simply make up vocabulary lists. You learn a word and its meaning, and that's it. That's all there is to know. A word and its meaning. A word and its meaning. There are no different forms for these words. But for these words, as we learn every individual noun and its meaning, we're also going to learn different forms of that noun which express different ideas. So these 4 parts of speech are declined. They have different forms. These 4 parts of speech are free of declension. They are not declined. They do not have different forms. And that's all for lesson 2. Okay, so in lesson 2, I'd like to wrap this up now. In lesson 2, we learned the names of the 8 parts of speech. We talked about what those names mean and how that helps us to understand what the 8 parts of speech are. We learned in lesson 1 that speech is made of words. So words are the parts of speech. We can't possibly learn tens of thousands of words. So what we do to study the art of grammar is divide all of the words into 8 classes. And then we're going to study the characteristics of each one of these classes of words. And when we understand a class, we understand something important about all of the words of that class. Okay? So this outline of the 8 parts of speech is also the table of contents for our study in Latin Grammar 1, because we're simply going to walk through these through the course of Latin Grammar 1, studying each of the 8 parts of speech one by one. The only other thing I'd like to say is to remember that the study of the parts of speech is called etymology. Etymology. So in Latin Grammar 1, if someone asks you, what do you study in Latin Grammar 1? The answer is we study Latin etymology. We study the parts of speech in Latin Grammar 1. So that's all for lesson 2. Study the lesson for mastery. If you find anything in there that you feel like I didn't explain or talk about, please ask me and I'd be happy to clarify that. If there's anything that I've talked about that you simply would like to talk more about, feel free to write to me with any questions you have and I'll get back to you. But that should be a helpful guide for your study of lesson 2. And like I said, even though it's a short and simple lesson, there's a lot of material, a lot of important information in this lesson. So study it carefully. God bless your studies.